Well, to discuss this, I'm joined here in the studio by Mohammad Marandi. He's a professor at Tehran University. Also with me is Matthew Bryza. He's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and a former U.S. ambassador to Azerbaijan. In Washington, D.C., we have Adam Ereli. He's a former U.S. ambassador to Bahrain and a deputy State Department spokesman. And completing our panel from London is former Iranian diplomat Mehrdad Khonsari. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Mohammad Marandi, good to have you in studio for a change. Let me get into this by asking about what happened in Duma. So to the United States and others, it's absolutely clear that Assad has gassed his people again. There's a chemical attack again. But the Iranians, Bahram Qasemi, a foreign ministry spokesman, coming out saying such claims and allegations by the Americans and some Western countries point to a new plot against the Syrian government and people and are an excuse to take military action against them. Is the Iranian government engaging in atrocity denial here, or do they genuinely believe that, I don't know, the rebels did this?
No, I think the Iranians know that the United States knows that the Syrian government didn't do it. The Syrian government has no reason to do it. They're winning the war. In 2013, also, the Syrian government did not carry out the attack according to those who carried out research, the MIT research by Theodore Postel. We have Gareth Porter's research. We have Cy Hirsch's research. We also have Scott Ritter, who was a former UN inspector. His research, all of them show that even in 2013, the rockets that were fired and hit those targets, they could not have come, they did not have the range to come from Syrian government positions. Last year also, the evidence is inconsistent, as these writers have pointed out. And just recently, Sharmi Narwani, a writer, she went to the area in Duma that was liberated from the militants, and she saw these laboratories that were owned by these groups. The Russians, the Iranians, and the Syrians, all three have been stating for weeks now that the militants are going to stage a false flag operation.
Okay, so let me take that, right? Adam Ereli, we're going to go directly to U.S.-Iranian ties in a moment, but I think this is an interesting reference point for the moment. That's the Iranian perspective on atrocities that are being committed in Syria right now. Do they have a point?
No, I think it's absolutely ridiculous, the claim that your Iranian guest is making. I think that the record is clear that Iran, Russia, and Assad have a long history of war crimes, crimes against humanity, wanton massacre of hundreds of thousands of Syrians, whether it be in Aleppo or Ghouta or Duma, or any of a number of sites that they have ethnically cleansed or just murdered men, women, and children. You know, your Iranian guest can cite all the discredited sources he wants, but I think the civilized world recognizes that the evidence is clear. What they're less unanimous about and decisive about is what kind of action is needed to deter rogue regimes like Iran and Syria and Russia from perpetuating these kinds of crimes.
Okay, so, and Mohammad Marandi, you can respond to him throughout the course of the discussion, right? I don't want to kind of get bogged down into the sort of tit for tat about Duma, right? But let me ask you, Matthew Bryza, the fact that you have all these power brokers here, and the Iranians and the Russians and the Syrians have a lot of the power in Syria right now with the momentum of the war. And you have these situations where it's difficult to have an objective reality in terms of what has actually happened, no matter how many sources there are, no matter how much evidence there is. What does this say about the current divide, with Syria as the sort of litmus test of that divide?
Yeah, it's a great question. It is a great litmus test of the divide among the great powers. I mean, with Russia and Iran on one side, with the United States on the other, and Turkey trying to figure out where it fits in.
Who should Turkey choose, by the way?
Well, I'm an American former official, and I live here, so of course I think it should choose the United States. But seriously, I mean, Turkey is a NATO member with the second largest army in NATO. In my own conversations with very senior Turkish officials, it's clear they don't want to be left alone in the Middle East with Iran and Russia. They fought more wars against Russia than any other country throughout Turkish history, going to the Ottoman period. And the rivalry between Iran and Turkey is also centuries old.
Right. Okay, so Mehrdad Khonsari, let me ask you about the claim of Iranian imperialism in the region. So we have the Saudis, we have the Israelis, we have the Americans and others saying Iran is expansionist, what it's doing in Syria, it's doing in Lebanon, it might be doing with the Houthis in Yemen. and so forth. The Iranians need to be stopped, and that's why we need to take a hard line against them, tear up the nuclear deal. We can't mollycoddle this regime. Your response to that?
Well, I think that is a claim that is being made all along, but does Iran have legitimate interest in the region? Should Iran be able to exert itself in a way that is commensurate to its weight and position in the region? If the United States, for example, from thousands of miles away wants to impose itself in the Syrian situation, why shouldn't Iran? I don't think that that is the way to look at the equation, because that will just, result in accusations coming from both sides. The fact is that Iran is a regional superpower. It has always been a regional superpower. It has legitimate interests in the region. It has a right to try and protect its legitimate interests. It doesn't have to do obnoxious things in order to do that. But I think that that argument should be looked at from that perspective.
Okay, so Adam Ereli, Iran's a regional superpower. You have to engage with it. It's there, whether you like it or not. Why are you getting John Bolton on board to try and, I don't know, rub them up the wrong way now?
Well, first of all, I didn't choose John Bolton. That was the president's decision. Second of all, I think that no one denies that Iran is a regional power and should have good, positive relations with the regional states. Look, its size, its geography, its history would argue that Iran should be accepted as a responsible player in the region. Unfortunately, its record of interference, of destabilization, of funding and supporting forces that intend to or want to overthrow the legitimate governments of the region has caused not just the United States, and this is important to point out, but the states of the region to distrust Iran and to seek U.S. protection against Iran, whether it be in Bahrain or the UAE or Saudi Arabia.
Okay, so Mohammad Marandi,
it's not the United States imposing its will.
Sandy, let's ask Mohammad Marandi.
It's the United States responding to the insecurity that Iran has started.
Let's ask the man to my left. So, Iran, your country has a terrible track record. That's why nobody can trust you.
No, not at all. It's the other way around. The United States, the only three countries that want the United States are the three dictatorships. He was the ambassador to Bahrain, which is a dictatorship, and the Saudis helped crush the uprising in that country. I'm sure the Americans are very proud of that. In addition to that, the Americans, they're the ones who are undermining Turkey by supporting terrorists, the PKK terrorists inside Syria. So I think that the track record is somewhat different from what is being stated. With regards to the dishonesty of the United States and its responsibility in Syria, you have the 2012 Defense Intelligence Agency document that was partially leaked by Judicial Watch that shows that the United States knew that the dominant forces in Syria from early on were the extremists and that it helped its regional allies support those groups. General Flynn, who was early on in the administration, he admitted that the United States took a willful decision to support the extremists. The leaked audio clip by Kerry when he was speaking to Syrian opposition members where he said the United States allowed ISIS to advance on Damascus. This is online.
Okay, but does that in any way justify the torture inside Naya prison, the ethnic cleansing, the barrel bombs, the tens of thousands of people killed, the terrible butchery by government forces?
The accusations on both sides are many, but the fundamental issue is that a foreign power instigated violence in another country, fed weapons into that country, brought in tens of thousands of foreign fighters to undermine that country. That is, so they bear the most responsibility. And let me just give you one personal account. I fought in the Iran-Iraq War. I was gassed twice. The Americans gave those chemical weapons to Saddam Hussein. And if you read a 2013 op-ed in the New York Times before the invasion of Iraq, it was revealed that the United States at that time also tried to blame Iran for those chemical attacks on Halabja that were carried out by Saddam Hussein. So they are deeply involved in crimes against humanity in Iraq and in Syria.
Okay, you're hanging a question mark over the chemical attacks. Let me ask you, Ambassador Bryza, one of the great attempts at engagement between the West and the Iranians, and somehow, including, I guess, a lot of the Sunni Arab states and others, was the Iran nuclear deal. right? It meant a lot to the Obama administration. It meant a lot to Zarif and Hassan Rouhani. That could be on the verge of falling apart. In your opinion, how important is it to maintain it?
Well, everybody can find flaws with the agreement and the fact that there's a sunset clause after 10 years and complaints that it doesn't go far enough. But in my opinion, generally, when there's an international agreement put in place or an international regime that defines behavior, those are precious things. We've got so many countries that are lined up behind the agreement that it's counterproductive, in my mind, in general, to eliminate such mechanisms for cooperation. I wasn't a big fan of the agreement in the first place, but once it's in place, I think the United States is going to damage its standing in the world if it just declares the agreement torn apart. Plus, it's not clear the U.S. has the legal authority to make that happen.
Adam Ereli, is the Iran deal precious and too precious to tear apart?
I have to agree with my friend and colleague, Ambassador Bryza. The deal is not, by no means is the deal perfect, but it's certainly better than nothing. I mean, look, the important thing to keep in mind is that Iran, if it agrees and abides by the deal, is effectively prevented from developing a nuclear weapon for 10 years. That's important because if the deal is invalidated, that means that Iran is free to move ahead to develop a nuclear weapon, which will further destabilize the region. And let's be clear, Iran is on the verge of having the technology to detonate a nuclear device. That would be cataclysmic for peace in the region. We need to keep the deal.
Mohammad Marandi, you had a little smile when he said Iran's on the verge of detonating one.
Yes, there's a good book by Gareth Porter, Manufactured Crisis, that explains how Iran never violated international laws with regards to its nuclear program. And the United States has been using the Iranian peaceful nuclear program from the beginning to put pressure on Iran, like it has been doing for the last 4 decades. But I think that the most important thing to keep in mind is that this nuclear agreement is flawed by Iranian standards as well. But from day one, the Iranians have been abiding by it. But from day one, under Obama, the United States repeatedly violated the deal. The Iran Sanctions Act, the visa restriction laws, the Treasury Department's constant increasing of the list. And then under Trump, it got even worse through the presidential decrees, and now the president virtually he's torn up the agreement. It's almost meaningless. So I think that over the past 2.5 years, the international community has seen that it is the United States that does not abide by its commitments, and it's Iran that has been doing so. And with the behavior of the United States now towards China, towards Russia, towards Turkey, I think increasingly people are recognizing that it's the United States that should be more in isolation for its behavior and not Iran.
Matthew Bryza, is that fair?
Well, no, I don't agree with that characterization entirely. I mean, I think if you look at the agreement that's in place, and then the additional sanctions put on by the United States, that was because of elements that were not included in that agreement. So the U.S. is accusing Iran of supporting terrorism, of destabilizing, and for continuing a rocket program, a missile program, that does not come under the agreement, the nuclear agreement. So what Trump is saying is that we need these issues also to be curtailed on the Iranian side, and we're ready to use sanctions to do that.
Just one sentence. Articles 26 to 29, they're all online. Your viewers can see them. They have been specifically violated by the United States from day one.
Okay, Google it if you like. Mehrdad Khonsari, let me ask you about John Bolton, and I'm going to bring him up again because we talk a lot about Iran when we say, well, you have the reformists and those who are engaging, and then we talk about the hardliners, for example, and hopefully the hardliners don't drag the reformists to the right and so forth. With Bolton injected into the scene, how do you feel as a former diplomat that this is a guy who was addressing MEK events recently, who was given a platform by them and endorsing them, a group that Iran sees as a terror organization? I guess when I mention MEK to Iranians, it's like mentioning the PKK to Turks, right? So how do you feel about the fact that Bolton likes the MEK?
Well, I think that describes Mr. Bolton better than anything else. You know, if his judgment is one that supports the MEK. Well, that says a great deal. But fortunately, Mr. Bolton has also announced that he is not going to be adhering to any of his previous views, but supposedly pursuing an agenda which President Trump is setting, whatever that may be. But I think the important question, going back to what Ambassador Ereli said, when you accuse Iran of interference, and obviously Iran has interfered, there's no question about it, but interference has not been one-sided. The Saudis, the Emiratis have all in the past funded various organizations and activities aimed at destabilizing the Iranian regime. Now, what is at stake right now, of course, is over the last 39 years, we've had terrible bad behavior by Iran in terms of ostracizing the United States, anti-Americanism, anti-Israeli propaganda, all of these things which were essentially gratuitous. But for the last 3-4 years, the present government of Rouhani, has tried to have a new approach and has by moving on the JCPOA and other issues, it has tried to be more accommodating to international views and concerns. And at a time when the present government of Iran is striving in order to unlock certain situations, we are finding all the chickens coming to roost, and the venom of 39 years of, you might say, bad experience, all trying to sort of be unleashed on Iran at this time, which does not go in line with the realities of the day.
Okay, so Adam Ereli, let me then ask you, Mr. Ambassador, do you believe that the United States is judging Iran based on prior behavior and prior posturing and is tone deaf to the current trends in the country?
Well, actually, I would reverse the question. I mean, first of all, the short answer is no, but let me change the perspective of the question. Don't ask me as an American what we think about what's going on in Iran. Ask the Iranian people. I mean, they're the ones that turned out by the tens of thousands a couple of months ago and said that Rouhani and Khamenei and the whole corrupt clerical establishment were defying the will of the people by interfering in Syria, by sending Iranian Iranian soldiers, Iranian money to defend Bashar al-Assad while they were neglecting the needs of the Iranian people economically, socially, et cetera, et cetera. I would also point out, in response to Mr. Marandi's views that, we've got a bunch of corrupt dictatorships outside of Iran, that Iran has the highest rate of per capita capital punishment in the world after China. In the world, period.
Yeah, thanks to the United States, because ever since the United States invaded Afghanistan, the heroin production in Afghanistan has increased 30-fold. And that's because of the role that the United States has played in all this.
I just want to ask you, have you made your point? Because I want to give Marandi the final word here, because I need to wrap. We've got to move on. So
yeah,
are you?
Please,
yeah, okay,
please.
Great. So put a button on that. Mohammad Marandi.
Yes,
final response, final
during
word.
the past 4 decades, it's been Iran that was the victim. The United States supported the dictator, the Shah, helped him create his secret police to murder Iranians. And when the Shah was suppressing the Iranian people, the United States backed him. The United States backed Saddam Hussein. They gave him chemical weapons. The European countries and their allies gave them chemical weapons. They've committed crimes against humanity. And every time the Iranians tried to move towards rapprochement, the United States reacted negatively. When the Iranians gave the Conoco agreement to the United States, they slapped sanctions on Iran. When the Iranians cooperated in Afghanistan, Iran became the axis of evil. It is obviously that the Iranian side is the victim. In Syria and Iraq, the Iranians were invited by the governments. Iran helped these governments resist ISIS and other extremist groups, whereas the United States helped the extremist groups in Syria. And in Yemen, the United States is helping the Saudis massacre and starve the Yemeni people.
Okay, gentlemen, unfortunately, we're out of time. I would have loved for this to continue, but we've got to move on. Mohammad Marandi, you've got to catch a flight as well. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Matthew Bryza, Mehrdad Khonsari, Adam Ereli, and Mohammad Marandi.
Thank you.